Welcome to day 4 with Frank Scalish. I think this is number 54. Why you always laugh when I open up the show, Frank? You're always just sitting there ready to go, and then I open it, and you just start laughing uncontrollably at me.
Because it's just like, I feel like it's Rod Serling from the Twilight Zone. Here we are.
I've never seen that.
On day 4.
Is that a show or a movie?
It's an old show, and it's old. Like, I was a kid when it was out. It was, like scary stuff and just really avant-garde crazy stuff on it. And it was like a mystery, thriller type of thing.
Like an hour show every week?
Yeah, it was on every week. It's called The Twilight Zone. They made a movie out of it.
Didn't they have like crazy music to it? What was the Twilight?
Yeah, it was nuts. And they actually made a movie. They made a movie out of it. But so I just laughed because you got that pause, when Rod Serling would narrate it. Do the pause, and I sit there and I laugh every time because I'm like, okay.
Well, typically, for our Monday through Wednesday shows, we have the intro, or this is BTL, but for the day 4 show, because it's a little bit different show. It's a Tips and Tactics show. We don't run the intro,
Correct.
So we just throw the graphic up, and then I open it up. But was the saying like the Twilight Zone? Is the saying like that, like based off of the show? Or was the show based off of the saying? Like, which came first, the saying or the show?
The chicken or the egg? I don't know. I don't know. I think the show came first. And then they called it. It was called The Twilight Zone. We're going in a direction, dude. We're going.
No, it's all good. We can go whatever direction we want. And that's kind of the beauty of today's show. I teed it up yesterday on BTL as a Q&A show. With Frank Scalish. We have a couple of things that we're going to cover, kind of revisit some of the past popular shows that we've had over the past 54 shows. Also, we get a lot of questions for you. Sometimes we don't get to them. So if you have a question for Frank, doesn't have to be related to anything specific. If there's a show that you didn't get your question answered in, if you have a question about one of the past shows, anything, go ahead, cue it up on the instant feedback, and Frank will answer it. We'll mix in some phone calls throughout the show too. Also realize Bass Live is going on the Harris chain. They did a really good job of pumping this one up. All indications are that it is going to be an absolute slugfest. This is one of those where you're like, all right, I want to see if it's going to live up to the hype, the full moon, the 80-degree days, the 90 boats on 5 different lakes. I mean, when you were on tour, Frank, were there events that there was just a different vibe during practice? You'd be at the launch ramp and look at all the other guys and just go, hey, it's going down this week.
There was one event, and I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was on Toho. And I had got on fish, and I was doing my thing, and it was not easy fishing, but I was catching them pretty easily. And I had taken the last day of practice, because back then we literally only had about a half a day you could practice on the last day. And I said, I got to get my equipment together because I'm a mess. So I didn't go out on that last day. And the big fish moved on the beds in the last hour of that practice. And the guys that found them, it was a freak show. I mean, they were coming in with, 45, 50-pound limits. I mean, it was a freak show. And I missed it because I was back at the hotel room spooling rods. Yeah, that was unbelievable. And it was really very similar. The full moon showed up and the weather broke and those fish moved in like gangbusters. Yeah. And I was not on cue.
He missed the boat on that one?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I was fishing behind him all day.
Well, we've already got the questions rolling in, and I think we have to start with the biggest burning question because there is also breaking news in this story, and I'm sure this has been a topic. You talked a couple shows ago about how you went ice fishing with Darren Schwinkbeck and Paul Hiroski, and Aaron asked the burning question that I'm sure we all want to know, and I'll throw it up there, and then I'll give a little little backstory, said, did Frank get caught up in the ice fishing scandal in Ohio, which caused the mayor to step down? Well, earlier.
Hey, I was the mayor of Shantytown.
The mayor of Shantytown earlier, and I don't think we covered this in the show yet, but as of February 14th, which is ironic, I believe he stepped down on Valentine's Day.
He did.
The mayor of a small town of Ohio has resigned after making national headlines last week for saying that allowing ice fishing would lead to prostitution.
Yeah,
was this a big story? Was this a huge story in Ohio? Was this on every news station across the state?
Dude, it went national. It literally went national. I had some of my buddies that live in Canada contact me and make jokes about this.
Well, that would be international.
Yeah, international. My bad.
Okay, so here it is. So Schubert suggested last week during a city council meeting that allowing ice fishing at a local park could lead to prostitution. This is his quote. Does someone come back next year and say, I want an ice shanty on Hudson Springs Park for X amount of times? Schubert said during the meeting. And then if you allow ice fishing with shanties, then that leads to another problem, prostitution. Now you've got the police chief and the police department involved.
That guy had nowhere to go but step down after that comment.
And then he announced that he stepped down.
Yeah, but here, look, you know what's funny about that? Clearly he knows nothing about fishing. Clearly. Okay. So if you just look at his statement, okay, what I want to know is how he got from ice fishing to prostitution in the same
Well, I think that's
sentence.
what everybody wanted to know, unless he went on a very special ice fishing trip at some point.
Exactly. Exactly. So I said, if you don't want to, if you dig in this guy's past, you might pull some skeletons out, because I don't see how you make that jump. I don't see how you go there.
I think the next video you need to do is just walking around knocking on shanties saying,
oh, we're going down a dangerous path,
poking
Matt.
your head in the shanty, said, everyone all right in here?
Yeah, hey, as I hear some commotion. We're going down a real slippery slope.
Hey, Jimmy, I think that's Frank Scalish loitering next to our shanty.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh. All right, we'll get right into it before we get up on it. I saw a couple good questions already. And I didn't know this.
The panty shanty.
Dude, we gotta get off of this. That was my fault. You use a speed clip with your crankbaits. Yes, that's a pretty basic answer. All the time, 100% of the time. You ever tie direct?
Never. I always use a speed clip 100% of the time.
Next one. I guess I could have asked the question about waxing your rod right after the discussion we had. Where was that one?
Yeah.
There it is. I can't make this stuff up. On one of the earlier shows, Frank said that he waxes. He waxes his rod after each trip. The burning question that everyone has is, what wax does he use? I must have been gone for this trip, so I'm not sure. I don't know what he's talking about.
Yeah, I use two types of wax. I use slick mist or lemon pledge. And if you're caught in a pinch and you don't have any slick mist, lemon pledge. And the reason I do this is because it keeps a lot of the dirt and the grime from adhering to the rod blank and to the guides. So I also clean my guides out, and I like the slick mist a lot. Back in the old days, I used to use Braid Aid. Remember the Braid Aid?
I do not.
Wilson made it. They called him the Professor, and he made.
Oh yeah.
And so he made Braid Aid, and I used to do my rods with that because that stuff, the line flies through the guides when you use that.
Yeah, he was at every single Elite Series tournament, and he had a wrapped truck, and he'd park it right down there by the ramp.
Yes.
Didn't he have like all sorts of cleaners and conditioners? And what was his tag? Was he the bass?
The bass. He was they called him the professor,
professor?
fishing professor or something like that. And
he did like classes. Did he do sonar classes too?
Yes, he did sonar classes for Lawrence.
But he also had he was kind of like the ice cream truck of fishing knickknacks, like
Yeah,
little things that he always had as his deal with the professor. I totally forgot about that,
yeah.
Frank.
He made scents. Remember, he made little
Yeah.
bottles of scent that you could put on spinnerbait blades and crankbait bodies and all kinds of stuff. And then he made this stuff you spray on your locator screens, and it cleaned the screen like instantly. It was wild. It was really wild stuff. But his braid aid was amazing. I used that. I would treat my fly line with that stuff, and you could spay cast a mile with it, man. It would blow through the guides. It was great stuff. Yet we digress.
All
But
right.
yeah, it was great stuff.
This is kind of a tough one, and we're all over the board here, but that's the beauty of it. Frank, this is from Chris G. Frank, I live on the Mississippi River Delta. We experienced a massive fish kill after Hurricane Ida. The bite is now tough with the spawn coming. Would you focus on super obvious areas, or have you ever dealt with a fishing after a fish kill? I know there's dead zones in the Great Lakes, aren't there?
Yeah, there's dead zones, and that's based on farm runoff, and the nutrients give you an explosion of algae, and then the algae dies, and then you have these oxygen depleted zones. Um, but the fish kill thing, the only time I've ever experienced a fish kill and had to fish in it, I was snook fishing, and I was fly fishing for snook. So basically, what I did was I focused a lot on the moving water. Um, outgoing, ingoing tide, a lot on the moving water pinch points where the water really had to build up speed to get through places. But in the bass world, okay, um, if you're going to fish during the spawn, you have to put your trolling motor on high and start looking, because what's going to happen is you're not going to have these. Uh, you'll have, like, when everything is normal, you have major spawning flats
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of bass use at the same time. And you might be finding, two or three or four on the inside swing of a point. You got to look at these little places like that where you're not going to, maybe you won't find 50 or 60, but you'll find three or four, and they like inside turns on points. Even if you're talking about the marshy areas, near the delta, could be a sandbar. Sandbars are formed by all the tides and the current, and then if you go on the inside edge of the sandbar, right where it rolls, you'll see them bedding down over there. They also like to bed down against cover. It's going to be tricky because I don't know the magnitude of the fish kill, to be honest with you, and I've heard people say where I live, oh my gosh, the winter was so hard, we had a major fish kill. I saw thousands of dead bass everywhere. And then I go fishing and it's like normal. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Normal. So it just depends to the magnitude of what kind of fish kill you're talking about. And I don't know, I didn't hear about it, so I don't really know.
Before I moved to Oklahoma, they had the virus that
Yeah,
went through
yeah.
the state, and I remember, you know what? That might be an interesting BTL to have one of the
Biologists.
You don't even have to be an old timer then, but one of the veteran guys in Oklahoma who fished through that fish kill where, instead of 15 to 18 pounds was winning, 4 to 7 pounds was winning.
Yeah.
I just remember talking to guys in there saying, they'd be fishing, offshore, dragging a jig or something, and a fish, just an emaciated 3 or 4 pounder, would be alive and just come spiraling up next to the boat and just flicking on the top of the water. And they're like, how do you catch fish when they're literally dying in front of our eyes?
Yeah, you're catching the ones that aren't affected by the virus, is what you're doing.
And there's still lakes, that you fish on it and you hear a guy say, oh man, you should have seen this place before the virus, or this place got really good after the virus. But that's tricky because I don't think those situations happen very often to where there's a playbook on how to best attack it.
Yeah, they don't really. I mean, I have never experienced it in full force.
Doug wants to know, when do you throw a clown jerkbait and when do you throw an orange jerkbait? Do you ever throw an orange jerkbait? Or is he talking about like a chrome with an orange belly? Or
well, chrome orange belly is a completely different thing than an orange.
But you do throw a
jerkbait.
straight orange.
No, I do not. Clown. I've experienced really good things with clown in both cloud cover and bright sunshine. Most of the time when I'm throwing clown, I'm targeting smallmouth. I'm not really targeting largemouth, even though you will catch some largemouth on clown. Most of the time when I'm throwing it on smallmouth. And I have found no difference between bright sunny days and cloudy days with clown. It's just, there's something about that color mix that excites smallmouth. And in fact, usually I have a very natural colored jerkbait on and a clown colored jerkbait.
Okay. That kind of leads us into the color discussion that I wanted to have, and then we'll get back to the questions. But one of the things that that you recently posted on your Instagram. What's your Instagram handle, Frank Scalish?
Scalish_fishing.
Great follow there. Were some very vibrant and realistic bluegill patterns that you can go see, which then led me down the path of, man, there's so many different bluegill patterns. There's so many too. Now it's winter and all the craw patterns, and you've been showing a bunch of craw patterns, especially in like that speed end, and there's some on the paint shop right now. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, man, this is a question that I have. And you are a guy who designs colors, paints, does that for a living. That's how you feed the family. And I was like, man, run me through, there's blue craw, there's white craw, olive craw, red craw, orange craw. And I get confused as to how do I know what hue of crawfish, particularly in this late winter, early ice out period where I know it's right, but am I missing the boat if I'm just going with a fire red or fire crankbait and not messing with the other hues of crawfish? And how do you determine what color of crawfish you use when?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's a really good question. It's not complicated actually. In the cold water periods, I always start out with red. For whatever the reason, and I don't know the biological reason, but they want it. I mean, that's just the deal. Everybody knows it. They want it. But while I'm throwing the red craw, I will have natural craw pattern on as well, because I always want to keep them honest. And I always believe that if you throw something very natural looking, you can always catch a bass on it. So if I'm going through an area and I'm throwing a red craw crankbait, you can bet dollars to a donut that I'm going to intermix a natural craw pattern right in the mix. So the color bases, now there's like, everybody throws a black and blue jig all over the country, just like everybody throws a red crawdad crankbait all over the country. But there is a black and blue crayfish that's a northern strain craw. And I have caught them and I have looked at them up close and personal, and the blue on these things is vibrant. It's like pearly blue. The first one I caught, I was fishing a pond with one of my sons, and I saw it crawling around on the bottom, and I couldn't believe it. It looked completely artificial. And so I took my flipping stick and I was teasing it with the plastic lizard, and he grabbed onto it, and I pulled him out of the water and got him and looked at him, and I was amazed at how it was. So I researched it. This particular craw was a northern strain crayfish. They don't normally grow down south, even though there's variations down south. Wasn't as vibrant as this, which the irony of it is like on Champlain, when I took second place on Champlain, I was throwing a black, blue, purple jig, and to mimic that craw that I found. And well, that's called a blue lobster. It's
Oh.
not.
No, that's a crawfish.
All right. But
It's just zoomed in, but is that kind of the color of the blue?
that's the
No.
color of the blue, but it had modeling. It had black marbling on
Oh.
the carapace.
Okay.
And it
On the
was
what?
the shell, the back shell.
Okay.
And it was black and it was blue and it was fantastic. So I look at that stuff, but then conversely, when you jump to Lake Erie, everything is some form of light olive or dark olive with little orange pinchers. They have little orange tips on their pinchers, and some of them are almost transparent, but they're olivey. They're like a watermelon green pumpkin mix, but a transparent color. Very similar to that new Yumdinger color, GB Haze, where it's almost watermelon and it's almost green pumpkin and you could almost see through it. That's the exact color of the crayfish on that lake. And so, by studying the crayfish on different types of bodies of water really kind of gives you a clue onto what you need to be throwing, or at least color mimic. The other thing too is a lot of river systems and stream crayfish are tan and brown. Even up here, they're tan and brown. Now you do have some olives and some that are olive marbled orange up here, but for the most part, they're tan and brown. They're like this dude. That's a stream craw.
With the little orange
Yeah.
tips and tan and brown. Now, is their color because of their species, or is it because of their diet? Or is it because of time of the year, water temperature, and breeding cycle?
Species mostly.
Okay.
They'll change color. They'll get more transparent when they molt. All the crayfish will become more semi-transparent when they molt. It's kind of a protection mechanism because they don't have a hard shell yet. The hard shell hasn't developed yet, so it's a camouflage protection mechanism.
So if you're going to a body of water, it's the time of the season that they're eating crayfish.
Mm-hmm. Which
but
is
you're not
technically all year.
Technically all year, but
yeah.
They seem to eat it better in the spring. Is that because of the crayfish are coming out and there's a more caloric benefit to them?
The crayfish definitely. Listen. I've steelhead fished in the middle of winter and saw hundreds of crayfish on shale flats.
Really?
Yeah, they don't hide.
Okay.
They don't. They just don't hide. Their metabolism slows down just like every other, cold-blooded animal, but they still eat and they still move around down there. It's just not wild. But I have seen them in the middle of winter. And when I saw that, I was amazed because I'm like, oh my gosh, there's, 3 feet of ice off the riverbank, and here's all these crayfish milling around on this shallow shale flat. So I immediately changed my fly to olive colored articulated sculpin pattern and started smoldering the steelhead, dude. They were practically hitting the thing when it hit the water. Because they were feeding on those crayfish as they would come over the river, the shale ledge into the plunge hole and then get washed down, they would feed on them. And so it's just paying attention to what you're doing. You know what I mean? Like here, look, they eat crayfish all year with reckless abandon. But the problem is we start to abandon those crayfish patterns during the summer because, as everybody knows, bass start to gravitate on a bait fish pattern. They start to move with the shad or some of the other pelagics in the lake, and they start to predominantly feed on those. But let's be honest, if you're on a shallow water fishery and shad may not be the most prevalent of the bait fish, you can go flip a jig or drag a football jig and hammer them. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're mimicking. One of my favorite crayfish crankbaits is the Rebel deep craw.
That's now we're going old school.
Yeah,
like to me this symbolizes the mid to late 90s for me 100%. Is when you tied the wee craw on and it was game time.
Yeah, it was game time. This thing has a wide wobble to it. You can reel it in real slow, and it just wide wobbles. It digs and roots in the rocks, and it comes through the rocks great. One of my all-time favorite crayfish baits is this one right here, and it's not. And the crazy thing is, this bait has not evolved over the years. It's the same bait that I used to throw when I was a kid. It's the exact same bait, only we got away from it because here, let's be honest, new crankbaits come out, new trends come out, and it's not sexy anymore. You know what I mean? Oh, that's the bait you threw when you were a kid. Well, yeah, but here I got them in my boat. I got a whole box full of them in my boat. I never leave home without them because there are times when you just can't beat this bait. And it comes in great colors. Like these two are my all-time favorite. It's whoa, where am I going?
It's a little slower and a little bit the opposite. There you go.
There you go. So the top one is an olive bone craw. It's olive and bone with a little orange on the belly. The bottom one is a chartreuse and brown with a little bit of orange on the belly. These are my two mainstays. So as in the cleaner water, I throw the top one, and in off-colored water, I throw the bottom one. You know, when everybody was on Table Rock crushing them on wiggle warts, I was throwing these things and hammering them. And it's weird because it's old school. And they even have, they have the bright red too.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
mean?
With
the little blue pinchers on it.
Yeah, money, dude. And so, here's the thing. I catch them in the summertime on those baits too. If I'm fishing riprap and stuff like that, I have no issue picking that bait up. If I'm on a river system, no matter how big or small the river system, no issues throwing that bait. But it's crazy to me because on this show we talk about a lot of stuff all the time, and some baits just fade. They just fade away. And the Rebel Craw is one of those baits that kind of just lost popularity in the.
Did guys used to throw it in tournaments all the time?
Oh, you know it, dude.
I
just
mean,
like
I said, I really got into this in 2007, 2006. So before that, I mean, were there Rebel Craws on the deck of guys' boats?
Absolutely, absolutely, and deep wears, which they don't make anymore, but maybe they will. Maybe they will, but those baits were, the original crayfish style baits, and it's money. And to this day, to this absolute day, I still throw them and I still catch fish on them. It's just, and I don't understand why it waned. Just like the lizard, dude. How many guys do you hear throw a lizard anymore?
I think that's kind of making a little bit of a comeback.
It's making a comeback.
It's kind of making a comeback.
And I think we should take the credit for that because of the Carolina rig shows.
Carolina rig lizard. Listen,
That's
I
right.
will say, my childhood revolved around four baits. One would be a fresh Canadian crawler on a number 8 gold Aberdeen hook, just hooked right through the tip of the nose. That was probably my number one go-to for bass for a long time. And then it would be the G or S11 3-hooked floating Rapala. The Meps Aguila number 3
black and yellow dots.
No, this was just a gold or a silver blade. And I never got into the squirrel tail hair on the treble hook. I just liked the red sleeve of plastic that went around the treble hook. But the bigger one of the, it wasn't small, but it was bigger. And that Rebel crawfish. Those were the 3 that were must-haves at all times.
And see, when I was a kid, pond hopping and the like, I had the Meps Alga 3, black with yellow spots, but I like the squirrel tail better than the red sleeve.
Okay.
So this is how, everybody's got their confidence stuff, right? So I use that. I use the Popar, and I use the jitterbug at night. Ooh. Oh gosh, dude, at nighttime was the deal with that black jitterbug. But anyway, and those were like my go-to pond hopping baits. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just fun. It's funny because who throws this stuff anymore?
I know Ike talks about how he'll throw a Meps or a Panther Martin every now and then, but
I did on schooling fish on Pickwick one time.
Yeah, that rooster tail's a little sleeper on some of those lakes that have little bitty shad, particularly in the fall when they're schooling. You get the big long 7-6 or 8-foot spinning rod. You whip that thing out there, just a little white deal. But the black blade on the Meps is surprising because I always was a big fan of the flash, whereas the black with the yellow dots on it never had any flash on it. So I was like, well, what do they think that is? Do they think it was a leech, or is that a
I don't
lateral
know,
line deal? But
I
those things killed them. That
mashed them. Absolutely. The one thing I will tell you I never threw was those worms with the 3 little hooks in them.
The K&Es?
I never threw
the K&E bass stopper. That's how I learned how to bass fish, dude. That's what my dad did. My dad did the weighted just a round weighted bobber with the sleeve of lead around the bottom so you could cast it. The pre-rigged K&E worm that came in the horseshoe. You take the gold snap swivel and you snap it on that 6-inch leader. Yep. And we would cast it out on the point at Rock Springs on the bank and just slowly reel it in, and that worm would just slowly turn, and then the bobber would start going off to the side. That's how we caught. Yeah. That's how we caught 95% of the bass the first time I ever started bass fishing. Never threw one of
those in my entire life.
I think isn't there something close to that, like the Westy worm out west, where they did a bunch of like small pre-rigged, and it was the precursor to the French fry.
It was like the do nothing precursor to the do nothing. In fact, they used to Carolina rig that 4-inch worm with the 2 hooks on it back in the old days, way before my time. Mm-hmm. And they Carolina rigged that little 2 hooker. It's like a 4-inch do nothing. They called it a do nothing. They just cast it out there and barely moved the thing. How they didn't snag on everything imaginable. Carolina rigging that is beyond me. It's absolutely beyond me. But that led to the French fry.
Yeah.
And then everybody would Carolina rig that thing, and I'm like, I'm not Carolina rigging that. I'm Carolina rigging a lizard. And that's how I started Carolina rigging lizards. Everybody was throwing those French fries. And the irony of the whole thing is a yum dinger works the same way as a do nothing rig on a Carolina rigging it.
We kind of got off topic there, but we were talking about the crawfish colors. I kind of want you to wrap that up then. If I'm going to a lake in the spring, I want to throw crawfish. I'm not sure what color they are there. Are you flipping over rocks at the ramp? Are there 3 or 4 colors that you could show that you would 100% start on? Is there one that you consider a good all around?
Yeah, I can show you right now. I can show you some of my painted ones, or I can show you some of the Rebels.
Well, why don't you just show them all?
All right. So this is my absolute go-to color for a craw. It's a dark olive back, bone sides. Now, here's the important thing. The bone is the bone of the plastic. It's the bone color of the plastic. And the orange belly. This is my go-to. This is my number one go-to. I will not hesitate to pick this color up in any water condition. Okay. My next one would be the brown and chartreuse. This is my next one. And I also, like on smallmouth bodies of water, I've thrown this in gin clear water and plastered the smallmouth on it. But this is my second choice. Of course, early in the spring, you've got the red craw, because you have to have the red craw. Now, I have red craw in Normans. I have red craw in all my diving crankbaits as well, because it's the springtime color. Here's one of my hand-painted red craws, if we can.
Wow. Got a little bit of a blue on the
just a smidge of blue pearl in there. And this is on a fat-free 6. And then I have my stream craw, which is brown, bone, and orange. But if you notice, I put a little bit of pearl on the back, a little bit of orange pearl on the back. This is a very subtle bait, with the exception of the red pincher tips. It's a very subtle crayfish pattern. I'm trying to see if you can see there it is. I even dotted some of it up here in the chin area.
Very nice.
And then here's my northern craw.
And that's more of a darker blue,
Yeah,
deep
it's
olive.
right. It's a deep olive bone, a brownish black. Actually, it's like a raw umberish color, and then mixed with olive. And so basically, a good rule of thumb is this: in the super cold water, start out with your red. As the water temperatures start to increase, start to go more natural. You can't go wrong that way. In the summertime, well, in all honesty, in the summertime, I barely ever throw red, even though I believe red would still work in the summer. I throw more natural stuff.
All right, let's get back to the questions. And Sean would like to know, Frank, when do you first go out to the Great Lakes in the spring?
Ice out. As soon as I can get on the water, as soon as it lets me. But here, I'm going to caution everybody. Disclaimer number one: when you go out on the lake and there's still ice floating around, because I've been out there with giant icebergs floating around before, you need to dress appropriately. You need to be careful, and you need to always let somebody know where you're going to be, and you need to carry some form of communication with you. Because if you go in the water that time of year, you literally have about 6 minutes of survival time before hypothermia takes you. So be very careful. But I'll fish right at ice out. As soon as I can start launching a boat, I fish. The smallmouth locations will be a little bit different until they start to get into their pre-spawn staging areas. Might be a little hard to find them because they're not spread out everywhere yet. But it won't be far after ice out that they will be.
Nate with an interesting question. What is your weakness and how do you work on it?
Okay.
I'm assuming we're talking fishing, not life.
We are talking fishing.
Okay. Because there is some life questions, because On the Couch in Kentucky wants to know if you have any relationship advice when you're in the doghouse. But anyway, back to Nate's question.
And I do, actually. But my biggest weakness of all things, well, here I'll just can I go to the beginning of the question? Can I go, can I take it far?
It's day 4 with Frank Scalish.
Okay.
You can take this question however you want, Frank.
All right. You know what? I love that. Gosh, I don't know what to do. With great power comes, great responsibility. So, okay. So Spider-Man. So anyway, so here's the deal. All right. When I was younger, my biggest weakness was the Ohio River. I just couldn't for the life of me get a grip on that river system. And so what I wound up doing is every spare minute I had, I went there until I figured out all the nuances of this crazy river. Okay. Going to techniques, there was a lake at home that would always be one with 1 or 2 fish, always. And it had a 15-inch size limit. It would always be one with 1 or 2 fish. And I'll never forget, I was talking to my father and I said, you know what? There's a better way to catch them in this lake, and I'm going to figure it out. And so what I wound up doing was I wound up leaving everything at home except 2 Carolina rigs and 2 crankbait rods, because I thought that there's a bigger population of fish nobody's messing with, and went out and started structure fishing everything I could find. And then I started to narrow it down to exactly what I was looking for. And I've never not won an event on this lake since 1996 because I got it super dialed in. So what you have to do is you take your weaknesses, okay, and you have to work on them by putting yourself in a position to where whatever your weakest techniques are is a prevalent pattern at that time of year, and you go out and do it. Like in the grass episode last week, I talked about how when I would go to Florida, I'd get my brain smoked out because I didn't understand all the grass. Because up until that point, I was a pure structure fisherman, and grass was never in the equation. So what I did to get over that weakness was I started going to fisheries that had grass in them, started researching the grass, what types of vegetation, how deep it grows, which is also predicated on water clarity and sunlight penetration. But anyway, then I started to get super comfortable in grass lakes because I started recognizing things like where I have two types of vegetations growing together is a high percentage spot, where you have a long finger of grass sticking out, high percentage spot where you got tons of grass, and then you've got areas where it's broken up. The broken up areas, high percentage places. So you start recognizing these things. So the best thing I can tell you is whatever your weakness is, make sure you put yourself on bodies of water that those techniques excel during that time of year you're going there, because it does you no good to put yourself in a lake where that pattern doesn't exist and then try to make it happen, because it's just going to be a lesson in frustration. So you go to those lakes where those techniques excel and you work on them and work on them and work on them. And eventually it becomes a strength, not a weakness.
I don't think I've ever told this story that highlights what you just said, but like 3 years ago, like right when Brad Hallman first started getting into the video game, and he was like, I want to go to a lake that I've not been on and kind of break it down, and you can this was, I'm still filming a lot back then. And we went to this, like the only lake that had matted hydrilla, and there was also some milfoil and hydrilla, but it had the canopies where it was hollow underneath and stuff.
Right,
and I'd seen it, I'd covered it, I'd done it a little bit, but I spent 8 or 9 hours in the boat, and all Brad did was flip and punch this stuff all around this little lake, idle-only lake.
Mm-hmm.
And, I mean, I sucked at it. Like, I'd not done it before. I mean, it was like a joke that, like, I didn't know how to catch a fish out of grass. But, man, after just being in the boat with him and seeing him, like, okay, here's this mat. Here's what's going on here. Look at this. You can see it's hollow underneath. Look how it's the closest mat to the channel. It's separate from the other ones, and boom, and how to get through. Like, dude, the learning curve was so fast,
right?
Because that's what I focused on just for one day. And then while it was still fresh, I went back and did it myself and tried to make it my own and use those techniques. That's helped me every time I've been to grass lakes down in Florida the last couple of years, and also Rayburn when it was matted in the summertime. But that's exactly what you were talking about, taking something that you're not that familiar with, weakness, and focusing on it to try to make it a strength. Still not a strength, but I'm not scared of it now.
Right. You don't have to be afraid of it now because you've had success doing it. So it's becoming more familiar to you. I get a lot of guys offshore fishing that, for whatever the reasons, offshore doesn't click with them. And I don't know if my thing is, I can look at a 2D sonar and I can see it 3-dimensionally in my head. That's just my creative side. So I never had an issue reading a locator. And today, let's be honest, you have side imaging, 360, forward facing sonar, all this stuff that takes this mystery of offshore fishing and puts a photograph to it, which is insane, because back in the day when I learned how to do this, we didn't have that. I mean, we had flashers and papergraphs, you know what I mean? And so you had to spend hours idling over areas looking for stuff to see how it laid, to see where the sweet spots would be. You literally had to pay so much attention to what you were doing that I think now, with the technology today, the things that I learned back then just make it even easier to be more successful today, because my understanding of this offshore game came when we didn't have all these visuals that we do today. Like, here's a perfect example. When the first GPSs came out, and you guys, I'm probably dating myself, but when the first GPSs
you just talked about Rebel crawfish, you're fine.
And MEPS inline spinners, and the cream worm. But when they first came out, it was just a gray thing with the outline of a lake on it. There was no map, no contours, no structure. It's just a gray outline of a lake. Okay. You could zoom way in, but all you're going to see is gray. Okay. So I had gone out and on some lakes and I found all these structural elements where I literally plowed the fish. Then I remember when the first mapping unit came out and I got it and put it in my GPS. And then I was horrified because a lot of my waypoints are right on these specific spots on this mapping element. And so I said, oh my gosh, everybody's going to fish this crap now because they can all see it. You know what I mean? But the maps back then were very not accurate. Like you could be, 10 yards off the structural element, the map's showing it over here, but really it's over here. And so I said, okay, well, they won't put that kind of work in. You know what I mean? And now with Lake Masters and CMAP and then Navionics sonar, this stuff is accurate. It's like really accurate. And now it's like, oh my gosh, no fish is safe. You got all this forward facing sonar, side imaging, 360. I feel like no fish is safe, yet I still find stuff brand new that's not on any map. You know what I mean? So you just have to take the time and you have to put the time in, and you make your strengths stronger and your weaknesses a strength. And that's why I love fishing, Matt, because it's always different. I love lakes I've never seen before because it's always an investigation.
It's good stuff, Frank. Frank, Jordan wants to know, this is a really good question. Do mild winters typically scatter fish? And if so, what is your game plan in that situation?
Okay, Jordan, here's the deal. Up north, as much as I hate when the lakes freeze because I can't put a boat on them, when the lakes freeze, it's the most stable water conditions of the environment ever. And what I have found is that when the lakes freeze, most of the bass, by the time the ice melts, are already in there or very close to where they want to be in the spring. I have caught bass with ice on the banks, still catching them in 3 to 4 feet of water right out front of spawning areas, right at ice out. So when the winters are cold, I think what happens is, as the winter comes, the bass, as everyone knows, winter time, the bass do not occupy the same amount of water column. Okay, so where in the summertime, the bass might be in 25 or 30% of the lake, in the wintertime, they're in 9 or 10% of the lake. So they're in tight groups. All right. So when the lakes get cold or freeze, these big giant groups of fish are already moving towards their spawning areas in the wintertime. So when the ice melts, they're already there, and they're there in big numbers. What happens when you have mild winters is the fish don't have to be anywhere at any certain time. The winters are mild. The bait fish are prevalent. It seems like the fish are all scattered out. And for the most part, I'll say they are, but they're not occupying such a minimal amount of the water column. They're occupying a little bit more of the water column. Some move up first and then others follow. So you have a very slow, drawn out period where you're not getting this massive fish migration. It's just slow and trickles. There was a couple winters ago, we had a super mild winter, and I was catching them all winter long, and I never caught a fish deeper than 5 feet through the entire winter. And during the spawn, it was like, why am I not finding these big giant spawners? They should be spawning already. They were already here. Well, what happened is some spawned, some left, some came in and spawned, and some left. We didn't get a big rush of a lot of fish shallow and all at one time. So it seemed like it was really random and haphazard. But what was happening was they didn't have to worry about it. Most of them were shallow all winter, and they just did their deal probably a little bit earlier than usual, actually, because I have seen them spawning in 55-degree water temperature before.
Up north.
Yeah, up north.
Largemouth?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting thing about that cold because and I might be speaking incorrectly here, but if my memory serves me right, when this OHIV thing and some of these Texas lakes and stuff absolutely exploded, yeah, it was in conjunction with forward-facing sonar and guys getting offshore and stuff, but it was right after like the coldest snap in the history of that part of Texas, where it was like 0 degrees. Everyone's pipes were freezing, stuff was busting, breaking, horrible. And then after that, boom, giants, megas, 10s, 12s, 13s, 15s. And that had to do with it had to have done with the severity of that, like resetting those clocks, putting those fish in grouped up locations because of the fact that it wasn't a mild winter, where it typically is a mild winter down there, and spreads those big fish out. It puts them all, I'm assuming where one 12-pounder feels comfortable, there's a reason why they're there, and there's not that many spots in the lake, so it's going to concentrate them, giving you a higher percentage chance of running across one if you happen to know where those areas are.
Exactly. That's exactly right. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, nature, fishing, this is why I love fishing so much, because we talk about a lot of things in every episode, and the best part about a bass is it'll make you a liar in 1 minute, because I've seen things that bass do that go against everything that a bass should do, like spawning in 55-degree water temperature. But what I came to find out is that if you have, a 5 to 6 degree jump in water temperature in a very short amount of time, I'm not talking about 2 weeks, I'm talking about a couple of days, there are fish that will get that urge to do what they got to do in the spring, and they'll do it. Now, it won't be the main spawn by any stretch. Just like you could find bass spawning in the beginning of summer if you look hard enough. Will you find a million of them? No. But can you find some? Sure you can. It's a survival mode in nature. We talked about this already. They can't all spawn at the same time, because if you have a catastrophic Wheeler effect,
done.
The whole population's wiped out.
Yeah. Kind of along those lines, something that I've always wondered is, you want to look for the warmest water in the spring, and here's where it typically is. And man, you can roll into a cove where the whole lake is, or a lot of the lake is mid 50s, and you'll find an arm that's got a little bit off 61, 62 degree water, and it's just a section of it. So here's my question to you, Frank. Do fish a quarter mile away, a half mile, do they know? Do they sense as that, it's a fraction of a degree warmer, and then they end up swimming, and you've got fish from other areas of the lake that are drawn to that warmer pocket, that warmer cove, and that's why you're catching them in it? Or does it just make the fish that are already inhabiting that section of the lake more available and more catchable? Are there more fish in that warm cove? Or are there just easier to catch fish in that warmer cove?
You answered the question 100%. They're fish that are already in that cove, that the warmer water is making them more active, and they're easier to catch. There's no way a fish a quarter of a mile away knows that water in that pocket is warmer. They just don't know that. The fish start to move shallow when the lengths of the days start to increase. So they start to move shallow. They start their migration. As they move shallower, if the water temperature is warmer, shallower, once they get there, then they realize it. But they have no way of knowing. The only reason they move is length of daylight. That's the only reason they move.
All right, I promise we go to the Sunline Hotline if anybody has a question for Frank on Random Topics Thursday, but a very educational show up to this point. Would you not concur with that?
I concur.
Well, I mean, it's educational for us. You're doling out the information to us, but that Sunline Hotline number is 405-253-5543. And before I realized, if you had called in during the last one, you probably heard like hardcore rock in the background. That was because I'm still getting used to this stuff, Frank.
You're doing great, dude.
Trying to get the call-in situation dialed in. It's still to where ask your question, then hang up afterwards, and Frank will answer your question. You can listen live on air for it, but you should not hear the rock music in the background this time. If you tried to call in a couple weeks ago, it should be nice and crisp. Once again, if you want to call into the Sunline Hotline, that number is 253-5543. It's also scrolling across the bottom banner there. What's your favorite spawning bait up shallow? Like if you had to just pick one. Let's not say sight fishing. Let's say blind casting, but those fish are up there. It's time for them to be doing their thing. If you just had to pick one bait that you thought got them to react the best, what are you going with? That's a broad question. You could do a whole show on that.
It's very broad because I would like the first question I'm going to ask is what's the water temperature?
They're spawning. Let's say it's mid-60s. Let's say it's 65 degrees.
Okay,
right?
So spawning. Okay, my first choice is going to be a square bill. I would go Norman Fatboy. Do I got to mention names of them too?
Whatever. Okay, whatever you want.
I would go Norman Fatboy, number 1. Number 2, I would go buzzbait. And number 3, I would have something to flip and pitch in that order.
But 2 of your first 2 are moving baits. Interesting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because I'm going to chase aggressors and I'm not going to deal with one that's on a bed.
So you're going to not focus on, so the fish you're catching on the crankbait.
They're going to be pre and post. They'll be pre and post. I sight fish when I absolutely have to, like in a tournament event, I will sight fish. Otherwise, I don't do it. Not because it goes against my religion or anything. I just prefer to catch them other ways. Oh, you know what I want? You know what else too? You guys, the discount code for LureNet, capital BTL 22. There's only 11 days left on this.
We'll throw that up after we get the Sunline Hotline.
All right.
Capital BTL 22, 15% off your first order at lurenet.com, including the paint shop.
Correct. And there's only 11 days left.
Okay. We do have a caller on the Sunline Hotline. I'm kind of nervous about this one. Let's see if it works. Hey, you're on with Day 4 with Frank Scalish. Who are we talking to, and what is your question?
Hey, Matt. Hey, Frank. It's Doug from Ohio. I got a kind of a random question. I have a small club tournament in a southern lake in Ohio. There's not much grass or vegetation, but if you go all the way down south, there's like lily pads. It's kind of a dirtier lake. It's shallower. And there's creeks running into these bays in the back. I'm sure it's going to be close to ice off when we go there. I was wondering if you could help me dial in something, maybe give me some ideas on where to locate some fish down there, if you could. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye. I mean, before you answer this, Frank, I would just like to say that sounds awful.
That sounds what?
That sounds awful.
Yeah,
it's very, very challenging.
It is challenging because if you're going to be there truly at ice out, the larger the flats, the larger the flats and the shallower the lake is in the back section, the longer it's going to take fish to get back there. I would pick smaller pockets, shallower pockets to look at first. If I'm going to pre-fish there, I'm going to take a winter to spring transition before I run all the way to the back of the thing. If my winter to spring transitions, my little steeper banks, my shorter shallow pockets, if those aren't working out, I'll run back there and check it just to see because there's going to be fish back there because there always is. And then I would go see how much more active those fish are and if they're catchable or in fact, if there's good numbers back there. I don't know the lake you're talking about, but if I did, I'm sure I would be a lot more detailed.
All right. That's good stuff. Let's go back to the Sunline Hotline. Hey, you're on with Frank on Day 4. Who are we talking with? What's your question?
Let's say for anonymity, we're going to go with On the Couch in Kentucky.
Oh, boy.
Frank, I got a question for you. Let's say you're hanging out with your fishing buddy, and you accidentally leave your phone on, and you're saying some things about your wife and her work and just kind of laughing about it. And then you look down and realize that you're on FaceTime with your wife still. And then you have to go home and you have a fishing trip the next week. What's your best way to get out of the doghouse? Thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Drunkwood. dude, I was privy to this. It actually happened.
Holy smokes! I
he wasn't saying anything bad. He really wasn't. I didn't think he was saying anything bad, but he was saying, yeah, oh yeah, no, it's not good.
I would tell her that you can't be without her, and so by keeping her on speakerphone, it's as if she was right there with you. And then I would buy her something big and expensive.
using the code capital BTL.
That's right, using the code capital BTL 22. But yeah, dude, I'm gonna just come right out and say it. You've got to get creative, man. Otherwise, you're kind of screwed.
Tom would like to know: is the number 7 the custom painted spook that you did for Mark Jeffrey's retirement? Is that spook ever going to be available on LureNet?
Yes, that spook is going to be available on LureNet. It is not ready at this moment, but it
kind of
will
wait
be.
more towards like air times when more than a quarter of the country can throw it.
Correct. But it is coming out. It is absolutely 100% coming out.
There's the banner code right there.
It's so funny because I was on LureNet last night, actually, and I bought a bunch of the new custom Yum Dinger colors and some speed ends. And I used the BTL 22 code myself. Which was fun because it came up and showed you your discount and how much money you saved. So I'm like, okay, well, I had this number of dollars I could spend in my head, and I saved $48. So I think I'm going to buy $40 worth more of lures, and that's exactly what I did.
This is a good question from Jimmy Frank. Kentucky Lake used to be in the top 10 lakes every year, and now it has become a tough fishery. How do you adjust your fishing for a lake that has changed so much over the past 7 or 8 years? And this is applicable to, there's a lot of lakes that go through a lot of changes. Cycles, I guess is the word.
Yeah, cycles. But I'm going to tell you right now, Kentucky Lake's problems occurred because of the Asian carp. The Asian carp occupies so much of that water column in every depth range that it literally took the structure fishing and made it, I don't want to say impossible, but now you're looking for a needle in a haystack because the bass, the biomass of these carp is so big that they crowd the bass out. And so you're not running into these concentrations of structure fish on Kentucky Lake like in the old days. There's still bass in the lake and still plenty of them. It's just you're battling with these doggone carp now. The only thing I can tell you is that you have to find a situation that's very comfortable for you, one of your strengths, and you have to cover a ton of water to find the bass because these carp are just, they're spreading them all out. And it's crazy. I have friends of mine that live on the lake and they hate those things for that reason. But, generally speaking, you do the same things you normally would do. Like if you're fishing there in the spring and the yellow flowers are up, you got to fish the yellow flowers. You're just going to have to, find places where these carp aren't and the bass will be there. They just crowd them out. It's the darndest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Barry would like you to kind of go over roughing up a rogue with sandpaper.
Okay.
What's with the sigh?
Well, I don't really scuff them up with sandpaper.
Okay.
The only thing I do to a rogue, the suspending rattling rogue, if you take the chrome plated ones, I scrape the chrome off the sides and the belly so it's all bone. That's what I do with it. I make sure that I leave the back color and a little line of chrome where the black back gradiates into the chrome. I leave a smidge line of chrome, leave the black back on, and I sand all the rest so it's all bone. That's what I do. So I'm wondering if that's what you're talking about.
Probably, because I remember that was a big show when you did that, because I went home and did that to a number of them.
Yeah.
And it looks awesome, because it looks like a bait it looks like a good color, but it also looks like it's been mauled after you do that. So you have like instant confidence in that bait.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the thing is, the bone from the plastic reflects light very differently than painted bone. So you have to remember that, because it's the bone from the plastic that's the magic.
What's the hardest color to paint, like to mass produce? Is there one color that's just really difficult to manufacture?
Most of your solid colors are a piece of cake. When I start to paint translucents and pearls and overlay my pearls and build depth into a crankbait, that becomes problematic in mass production, because it's massively labor intense. For example, I can paint a crankbait like here, well, let's just do this bait right here. This Rebel deep craw, okay, literally has 3 colors. The shell, the claws, and the little legs are a decal, okay? And so the decal goes on. The bait is bone. This bait is a bone bait. So the carapace and all that stuff can go on at the end. So basically, they'll paint the bait chartreuse, paint the belly orange, paint the back brown, slap the decal on, and put red eyes on it. It's a piece of cake. There's 4 steps to the bait. A bait like this, for example, has
One
about
of your custom painted?
has about 14 steps to it. So what happens is the more steps you have in process, the harder it becomes to mass produce, because it becomes a labor intense machine at that point. Mm-hmm. So the more detailed the paint jobs, the more labor intense it is. The less detailed, like chartreuse and blue, how hard is that? Paint the bait chartreuse, leave the back white, hit the back with blue, gradiate it down the sides, and you got a chartreuse and blue bait, and you got 2 steps. Piece of cake.
This might be the question of the show. How do apex fish species... Let me try that again. How do apex fish species, can you say that?
Yes, apex fish species.
Affect bass in an area such as, I got to assume in brackets, redfish, stripers, muskie, etc.? Great question, because a lot of us who go up north and stuff, we don't have to deal with that stuff, and a lot of people up north don't have to deal with the stripers down south.
Or the redfish, for that matter. Redfish necessarily won't run a bass out of an area, where muskies will. Muskies are like wolves. They will eat bass, and they eat them good. I was on St. Clair. I caught a 2.5-pound smallmouth, and a muskie came up and literally T-boned the smallmouth, and the muskie was wide. So I had about a 1/2 inch of the head sticking out and a 1/2 inch of the tail sticking out. The muskie T-boned the smallmouth, shook his head a couple times. I tried to land the fish. I told my buddy to grab the big spinnerbait out of the rod locker, throw it in front of the muskie. I'm going to stop reeling the smallmouth. He's going to spit it out to take it head first, rip the spinnerbait by him, and catch that thing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Then my buddy's like, I'm not catching that fish. I go, catch that thing, hook him. You know what I mean? And so he didn't do it. I gave slack to the smallmouth. He spit the smallmouth out. That smallmouth literally was shredded like nothing, shredded completely. So what happens, these muskies will move in and the bass will move out. Okay, now the stripers affect the bass differently, because the stripers are competing for food. But here's a unique thing about striper fisheries. If you have the stripers schooling and they're busting shad everywhere, some of your bigger largemouth are going to be below the stripers picking up the crippled bayfish that are going down. And so if you can ever get a bait through those schools of stripers without catching them, you have an opportunity to catch some really giant bass. So where the largemouth will work in conjunction with the stripers, in other words, they take advantage of it. It's an opportunity. They're opportunistic predators. They take advantage of it. When you have the redfish don't really do much to the largemouth. I mean, they may eat the little baby largemouth, but that's not what you're fishing for. And let's be honest, a 4-pound largemouth doesn't care if there's an 8-pound redfish by it. Just like you see those big carp laying around, and you flip to the tree next to the carp and you catch a bass. The bass they know that carp's not going to eat them. So any toothy predators like northern pike, muskies, stuff like that, they'll run the bass out. The bass aren't going to hang out.
How do you know if they're there?
Well, most of the time you don't, but with today's forward-facing sonar, you can. Like here, Frankie and I were ice fishing a couple weeks ago on a lake here.
In a shanty?
We were not in a shanty. We were on open water. Okay. And hey, let me just preface this. We were in the open air. So anyway, we're on the locator and a school of baitfish comes through. And about 20 minutes later, a school of crappies come through and we start getting them. Boom, boom, crappie, crappie, crappie. All of a sudden, this big giant blob comes through and it's a muskie and everything disappeared. The baitfish were gone. The crappies were gone. Everything disappeared. It took about 40 minutes after that muskie came through for the baitfish to come back and then for the crappie to come back. So, it's true. So that's part of it. If I'm fishing in north and I start catching northern pike a lot or muskies a lot, I look for a different area to fish, because while there may be some bass there in that area, it's hard to catch them when the pike and the muskies are in the area.
I don't know if it's like if it's like a legend or if it's true, because I've never seen it in person, but allegedly some of the biggest smallmouth on Lake Texoma are caught by the striper guides dropping live shad down to the bottom. And it's striper, 6-pound smallmouth.
Wouldn't doubt it for a minute.
I mean, I've heard that story from everybody that fishes Texoma. Man, you should see, I got a buddy's a striper guy, sent me a picture of a 7-pound smallmouth or a 9-pound largemouth.
Yeah.
Live shad on the bottom in the middle of a school of stripers.
Wouldn't doubt it for a minute. You should see the size of the smallmouth these guys catch trolling the schools of walleye on Lake Erie. Now, I get it, because there's a faction of smallies that do nothing but run pelagics. Mm-hmm. But in the example that you brought up, that's a case of being an opportunistic predator.
And cohabitation.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, the trolling, did you see Matt Steffen has a video out where he uses like a Lindy rig in front of his Carolina rig?
I didn't see that.
He's like, dude, up north, like all my walleye buddies catch a ton of bass on a spinner rig with a crawler. Yeah. He's like, so it's the same thing. He's like, you just slowly reel the Carolina rig in. It's like you're trolling a Lindy rig.
Exactly.
A couple you got your worm with
the worm
hook,
harness,
couple beads,
yeah.
And then a little spinner, and then your deal, and then your Carolina. I mean, there's a 0% chance I'm going to try that, but
yeah, there's about a 0% chance I'm doing it.
But it sounds interesting, intriguing.
It does. Well, because here, look, it's different. It's something the bass aren't seeing every day. I would never knock the technique, because as soon as I do, I'll be fishing something, and that guy
that'll be the next hot thing. Like I was talking on the show yesterday, I'd never seen it, but that Masa, the Japanese angler who kicked all our butts in the Opens last year, top 10 the last Elite Series, and he was using a free rig.
Yeah, which I don't understand that rig at all. I mean, I know how it's set up and everything, but I don't understand it, because I would Carolina rig before I'd ever throw that thing. Even though he smoked everybody on it.
Well, it's basically an unweighted, it's just a Texas rig, not pegged, but the shape and style of the weight then, I guess, allows the line to go through the eye of the weight. And like I said, I it's one of those things that I look at it and I'm like.
Now, does he use a swivel to stop it from slamming into the front of the...
No, it is dead nuts up against the front of it. I think he uses a bobber stop, and that's it, maybe. Or maybe not even that. It slides right up against the bait.
Yeah, see, I don't
Texas rigged weightless bait, and then that long cylindrical weight.
Yeah, it's just...
Apparently, guys smash them on it. I just have...
Well, how would that be? I mean, like, okay.
I don't understand how it would be any different than. I think it would just be like less natural than a Carolina rig.
Carolina rig. I mean, yeah, I mean, at that point in time, what's the difference putting your drop shot 3 inches above your weight or throwing a Carolina rig with a 5-inch, 10-inch leader? You know what
But
I
I'll
mean?
tell you what, when I drew he was a 20-year-old Japanese angler in the Open on Douglas.
Mm-hmm.
What was his name? Takuya, I think. Super nice kid. He did all sorts of weird stuff with his weights above the baits, Frank.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like 5 or 6 ways that he had weights above plastics that I was like looking at his stuff on the side going like, how does he even, I mean, it would take him a long time to rig it up, and he smoked me. He had like 3 for 9 behind me, and I had a limit for like 11 pounds. And here's the other crazy thing. You know, we're fishing rock, and I think those fish were spawning in the rock. His casts would last like, no joke, legitimately 2 to 2.5 minutes.
So he's just,
yeah, but he had the, you know, weights that all went up against, odd-shaped weights that were pegged way up. He had a couple with like multiple. It was just really interesting. Like nothing that was round, egg-shaped, normal weights. It was all weird stuff, and a lot of it was like that free rig type stuff that butted right up against. It's like a mixture of Carolina rigging, drop shotting, and split shotting.
that he must have this dialed in where he knows which weights come through which types of cover better.
That's the only thing I could think
Yeah.
of, because this was his first time over in the United States.
Yeah. And see, you can't forget either, over there, their lakes are small and pressured beyond human belief. So they have to reinvent the wheel constantly to maintain consistent fish catches over there. It's probably one of the most highly pressured fishing situations on the planet. And those guys really take stuff to the nth degree, because over there, every minuscule little thing matters.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
they're literally catching fish in a crowd every day.
And then you can even go so far as with the odd weight positioning, like the Tokyo rig, where you've got the piece of metal down and you put the bullet weight in and it punches through first.
Right.
I don't know. I go back and forth between fads and new stuff and just stick to the tried and true. But then it's also like, dude, there's like so many options that our minds are closed to, because this is the way we've done it. This is the way we've always
Right.
done it. And they're probably over there looking, why are you pegging a weight on your line in front of it when you can present it so much? You know, it's just
Right.
what you grew up and what you're used to. It. And I think you have to open your mind, especially with all these different weight options.
You
Just
do.
because it doesn't look normal doesn't mean it's not lethal.
Right. It doesn't mean it's not effective. Like one time Frankie and I were fishing, he was experimenting with the Tokyo rig, and we were actually flipping flooded willow trees and isolated clumps of grass. And we both caught him, and he just caught him on the Tokyo rig, and I caught him traditional. And we both caught him. So, I mean, I can't knock it. It works. You know what I mean? I can't knock it. It works.
I mean, outside of a dinger or maybe a fluke style bait at times, every single soft plastic offering that we throw has a weight to it.
Right.
Has some sort of lead or tungsten. But it seems, and listen, we've done 54 of these day 4s with Frank Scalish, and there's all sorts of live streams and all sorts of information. And it seems like the hook, the bait, the line, the action always gets the talking about. What doesn't get as much publicity at talking about is the delivery method, which the weight is the delivery method that you're using to
Right.
get that bait to them, and it almost seems overlooked. It got me thinking, because Chris Zaldane posted this thing about, chartreuse weight, like, and it was literally like a chartreuse weight. And then you see the free rig and you see all this stuff, and you're like, man, we'll go through 30 different creature baits and colors and all that stuff, but we'll just use the same weight in front of it.
Absolutely. I
Well,
mean,
maybe that's where we're missing the boat in some things, where different weights and experimentation would lead to more bites instead of altering the bait behind it. Fair point?
It's a very valid point. It's not fair. It's valid. I mean, that's the beauty part about this sport. It's forever growing. You could research it to the nth degree. That's what makes this sport so great every day. Because just when you think you learned enough, you didn't learn anything. You got to, learn some new stuff. That's what's cool about it. I mean, honestly.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it. And the reality of it is that dude probably had different shaped weights for different structural elements.
A lot of curve, long. They're a lot of them were very long pencil type weights.
Right. Back in the day, they made a pencil weight that was actually in a like a nylon sleeve.
Yeah, a slinky weight.
Closed at the end, closed at the top. It had a crane swivel at the top, and you could bend the weight. All right, because of the nylon, the way the nylon was, you could bend the weight and have it shaped like a C or a curve. And Lindy used to make them. Now they make them solid too. And the walleye guys used them for dragging spinner rigs and stuff because the thing wouldn't snag. It was like a snag-free weight. And a lot of guys in river systems that fish for other species of fish use these giant pencil weights because they don't snag in the rocks as much. So yeah, I mean, it's very valid and it makes sense. It makes sense to me.
How many different shaped weights do you have? How many different styles, or do you just have egg shape or Carolina rig and bullet weights?
Egg, barrel, pencil, bullet, and teardrop and round.
But your round, teardrop, and pencil are all drop shot.
They're drop shotting.
Mm-hmm.
A long, thin cylindrical for
PD rigging.
Yeah, where it's like
finesse
a mini
Carolina rig.
Yeah, it's a finesse Carolina rig, split shot rig. So I have those. I don't do that a whole lot anymore, actually. To be honest with you, I kind of got away from it a little bit. I'm having super success, really just fishing my strengths. So I kind of got away from a lot of that real finesse type stuff. Although I will, flick shake a lot. I really like flick shaking a lot. I actually like flick shaking better than the Nico. But the Nico can be deadly, man.
It can. I didn't mean to end the show on a weight rant.
It hardly matters. We did good. As long as you guys remember, you got 11 days left on BTL 22, so get it going.
There it is, BTL 22, 15% off at LureNet. Big thanks to Frank and the folks over at Pradco LureNet for making that happen. I do believe there might be some more giveaways, possibly some more codes in the future this year.
Oh, yeah.
Working on some special stuff with BTL. I know that the feedback and the support that we have gotten and that Frank has gotten and that LureNet and Pradco and Yum and all those have gotten because of the Day 4 shows. Greatly appreciated and keeps content like this coming your way.
Yeah, and we'll show appreciation throughout. I mean, we're working on a lot of different things. I'm trying to make this really fun for the viewers and for the listeners out there. I want to keep surprises coming, keep benefits coming to you guys, because without an audience, you don't have a show, and without good sponsors, you don't have a show.
I mean, we talk about this off air. It's still amazed at the feedback we get from the educated listeners and viewers. We talk about this all the time, who reach out and with just questions or comments or feedback. But especially you'll be like, man, dude, I had this guy, I figured out my DMs, and he took this and he went that and he caught a 6-pounder in his tournament on it.
Oh,
those are awesome stories.
Yeah, I had a guy the other day DM me. The irony of this is amazing. He had DM'd me probably right off the bat on one of the first 10 or 12 shows we did about water chestnuts. And in in last Thursday's weed show, we talked about the chestnuts and looking for the depressions and the high spots within, these rafts of water chestnuts. So about a year ago, he had DM'd me about how to fish these water chestnuts. I literally told him the exact same thing I said on the show last Thursday. And he had DM'd me after Thursday's show, and he had won a big event down there where he lives, taking that part of that water chestnut thing and applying it. Now, you got to remember, I talked to him, almost a year ago about the water chestnuts on his DM, because he DM'd me it. Last Thursday's show reminded him of that, because we did talk about the chestnuts on last Thursday. And he DM'd me that, he won the event and everything, and sent me a photo of it all. And it's fascinating. I mean, I think that's the best part about this show, is seeing the success that guys have. And here, I'll be honest with you, 10 minutes ago, you were talking about learning something, and I said, I learned too. And you're like, yeah, but you're telling everybody. But this is bringing everything back to the forefront, and it's forcing me to become a better angler. I'm even experiencing way more success than I've had in the past now, because it's keeping everything fresh. It's keeping my thought process moving. And so it's benefiting me also, and it's fascinating. I love it. I mean, I can't wait for this ice to melt. I'm losing my mind over here already.
What are the chances we get Frank out on the Bassmaster Opens next year at a day 4 wrap? You got the itch.
Oh, I do, dude. Yeah, and it's your fault, man.
Just giving you a hard time. You've been there, you've done that, you've been to the top of the mountain.
Oh, it's your fault, dude. I follow you on the tournament trail and watch the tournament trails, and I haven't really watched the tournament trails until I started doing BTL. I was busy with a lot of other things, and now I follow them, and I'm like vibrating every time they go to a lake. I'm like, oh my God, I want to go there. I want to go there right now. And Frankie's jumping in the BTLs.
The BFLs.
I mean the BFLs.
He jumped on BTL a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, the BFLs. My bad. And
he's ate up with it too.
Oh yeah, and so I'm excited for him. And I told him to pick a different division than Ohio, just so he can see more and learn more.
Yeah.
And he did. I can't wait to see what happens.
That's awesome. BTL 22, 15% off at LureNet. Covered a ton of topics today. I know I learned a lot about crawfish, about patterns, migration, about predatory fish. And next week, we'll be back with BTL 55. And then you've got to be like a month before ice out, don't you? That'd be like that middle end of March by next week. I mean, that's kind of when you start to get out on the water.
We're getting there. But we got a lot of ice this year. We still have 10 to 18 inches of ice. So it's going to probably be more towards the end of March, unless
plenty of ice for a shanty.
Yes, plenty of ice. We're all going to Hudson Springs Lake, and we're going to erect our shanties.
I don't know how else I don't know how else you could end a day 4 other than that. We'll see you guys next Thursday for another day 4.